Pause. What if trying to talk to the people that hurt us wasn't working? So we were even crazier and started studying the neuroscience of it all. And then we can teach to help not only heal the pain we have, but then help teach those that hurt us. We're not angry. We need you to understand so that we can get it out of our bodies and actually heal.
The Pasco Sheriff's Office says Deputy Troy Savetz kidnapped her around 5:30 p.m. from her home in Hudson in front of her 2 children, and then shot and killed her and himself in Spring Hill.
A mother of 2 just wanted to enjoy a beach day with her daughters. She had no idea that when she pulled into her driveway that evening, she'd be looking at the last few minutes of her life. And the man waiting for her in the yard wasn't a stranger. He was a sworn deputy sheriff who had spent over a decade wearing a badge meant to protect people just like her. Before we get into this one, if you're new here, welcome to Crime Files. This case is heavy, and it's going to stick with you. So do me a favor and hit subscribe, tap that bell, and like this video before we start. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling these stories, and honestly, these families deserve to have their stories heard. Okay, let's get into it. Her name was Amanda Fackler, but everyone who knew her called her Mandy. She was 39 years old, living in Hudson, Florida, and she was the kind of person who filled up a room without even trying. Mandy worked as a real estate agent with Century 21, and she built a genuine career for herself while raising 2 daughters, ages 9 and 12, mostly on her own. Anyone who's tried to balance a demanding job with parenting knows how much that takes out of you. And by every account, Mandy did it while somehow still having energy left over for everyone else in her life. Friends describe her as someone who radiated warmth. One close friend, Brandy Miller, said Mandy's beauty came from the inside and just kind of glowed outward. She said Mandy dressed in bright, happy colors, laughed constantly, and had this personality that made people smile just being around her. Another friend, Kristen Anatrini, first met Mandy as a client at her last business, years before they became close. Kristen described her as down-to-earth, someone who felt like family, like a sister, not just a friend. On social media, Mandy referred to herself as a fierce mama, and everyone who knew her says that wasn't just a phrase. She was protective, devoted, and completely wrapped up in her girls' lives. Now here's where things get complicated, and where you start to feel that knot in your stomach knowing what's coming. Mandy had an on and off relationship with a man named Troy Savetz. He wasn't just any boyfriend. Savetz was 47 years old and had spent 14 years as a deputy with the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office. He'd worked in the Marine unit and had prior law enforcement experience with the St. Louis Police Department before that. By outward appearances, he was a decorated officer. In 2015, he was even credited with talking a man down from jumping off a bridge, an act that earned him a department award. But according to the sheriffs who later spoke about this case, the relationship between Mandy and Troy was anything but stable. They described it as tumultuous, on again, off again, the kind of relationship that keeps pulling 2 people back together even when it probably shouldn't. Just months before this all happened, Mandy had posted something on Facebook about giving the relationship another chance, about choosing love over fear, about growing together instead of apart. It reads now like someone trying to convince herself things could be different this time. They weren't. It was Monday, August 10th, 2026, and Mandy had just spent the day at the beach with her 2 daughters. If you're a parent, you know what those days feel like. Sun, sand, probably some complaining about sunscreen, maybe an argument over who got the last snack. Just a normal, good day. The kind of day you don't think twice about because you assume there will be 100 more just like it. They pulled into their home on Phyllis Lane in Hudson sometime around 5:30 in the evening. And that's when everything changed. Standing in the yard was Troy Savetz. He wasn't there for a friendly visit. According to Pinellas County Sheriff Bob Galtieri, Savetz was upset about a television. He wanted it back. That's genuinely how this started. Not some dramatic, calculated confrontation born out of huge betrayal, but an argument over a TV set. Except Savetz didn't come empty-handed. He had a gun. An argument broke out between him and Mandy right there in the yard, in front of her 9 and 12-year-old daughters. When Mandy realized how serious this was becoming, she tried to call 911. Savetz took the phone right out of her hands. Think about that moment for a second. She's standing in her own front yard, her children a few feet away, and the one tool she has to call for help gets ripped away from her. But Mandy didn't panic in a way that left her kids unprotected. In fact, she did something that investigators later called incredibly brave. She turned to her daughters and told them to run inside and call 911 themselves. Sheriff Chris Nacco later said that on the 911 recording, you can hear Mandy telling her girls to go inside, save themselves, and call for help. Her last acts as a mother were about protecting her children. Even as her own situation became life-threatening, the girls listened. They ran inside, locked eyes with each other, and got on the phone with the dispatcher. And here's something that still gives me chills. These two children, ages 9 and 12, stayed remarkably calm. They gave the dispatcher details. They identified Savetz not just as their mom's ex-boyfriend, but specifically as a Pinellas County Sheriff's deputy. Sheriff Nacco later praised them publicly, saying their composure under that kind of trauma was extraordinary. By the time deputies arrived at the house, Mandy was gone, so was Savetz. What they found instead was chilling in its own quiet way. Mandy's truck sitting in the driveway, door wide open, her cell phone left behind at the house. But no sign of Mandy or Troy anywhere. Investigators quickly discovered that Savetz had rented a separate vehicle, and at that point, this turned into a full-scale search operation. Florida Highway Patrol got involved. The Pinellas County Sheriff's Office was notified. Hernando County Sheriff's Office joined in too. Pasco County deputies brought in K-9 units, drones, and aviation support. This wasn't a routine domestic dispute call anymore. This was a manhunt for one of their own. Somewhere out there, a rental car was moving with two people inside, and nobody outside of that car knew whether Mandy was still alive. While all of this was unfolding, there's a detail that came out later that's honestly hard to sit with. Sheriff Nacco said investigators learned that a witness had spotted Savetz driving the rental vehicle at some point during all of this, and that witness exchanged a thumbs-up gesture with him. A thumbs-up, meaning that to at least one outside observer, in that moment, everything must have looked completely normal. No sign of distress. No indication that anything was wrong. Investigators are still trying to pin down exactly when that encounter happened relative to everything else. But it's a detail that makes you realize how invisible this kind of danger can be from the outside looking in. Meanwhile, the search continued. Deputies eventually tracked the rental car to a residential area on Platinum Drive in Spring Hill, roughly 15 miles from Mandy's home in Hudson. This is where things got tense in a very different way. Investigators knew Savetz was armed. They didn't know if he was still alive, if he was waiting for them, or what they were about to walk into. So before any deputies approached that vehicle directly, they sent in a drone first. Through the drone's camera, they saw two people inside the car. Deputies moved in cautiously. And when they reached the vehicle, they found both Troy Savetz and Mandy Fackler dead inside. This was around 7 o'clock in the evening, roughly an hour and a half after Mandy and her daughters had first pulled into their driveway. Investigators believe Savetz shot Mandy before turning the gun on himself, though at the time of the initial press conference, they still hadn't determined exactly when or where the fatal shooting took place. Was it right after he took her from the house? Somewhere along that 15-mile drive? At the final location? Even Sheriff Nacco admitted publicly that they weren't certain of the exact timeline. That's an unsettling gap, and it's one that speaks to how quickly this entire situation spiraled once Savetz took Mandy from that yard. Back at the house, Mandy's two daughters were safe. Both girls were found unharmed and were eventually placed with their biological father. Physically, they walked away from this without injury. But it's impossible to imagine what it's like to be 9 or 12 years old, to watch your mother told to run for safety, and to later learn she never came home. That night, Sheriff Galtieri didn't hold back when addressing what happened. He called it inexcusable. He acknowledged that mental health struggles are real and serious, but he was clear that none of that excuse is taking another person's life. Sheriff Nacco added something that stuck with a lot of people who followed this case. He said that the moment Savetz committed this crime, he stopped being a law enforcement officer. In that moment, he said, Savetz was just a criminal. Now here's where this case gets even harder to process, because it forces you to sit with some uncomfortable questions. Troy Savetz wasn't some anonymous figure with a hidden criminal history. He was a 14-year veteran deputy. He'd worked cases, patrolled communities, and by at least one account, saved a man's life on a bridge back in 2015. He was someone the public was conditioned to trust. And yet behind that badge, he was allegedly capable of showing up at his ex-girlfriend's home armed, kidnapping her in front of her children, and ultimately taking her life before ending his own. That contrast is part of what makes this case so unsettling to people. It's not just about one specific act of violence. It's about how a person can present one version of themselves publicly, a protector, a decorated officer, someone who talks people out of jumping off bridges, while privately being part of a relationship that sheriffs themselves described as tumultuous and troubled. We also have to sit with the detail about the television. Sheriff Galtieri was almost blunt about it when he spoke to reporters, essentially saying this entire tragedy stemmed from an argument over a TV set, not a dramatic betrayal, not some elaborate falling out, a television. It's a detail that almost feels too small to hold the weight of what happened afterward, and that's exactly what makes it so disturbing. Violence like this doesn't always erupt from something enormous. Sometimes it's something as mundane as who gets to keep a piece of furniture, layered on top of a relationship that was clearly carrying a lot more tension underneath the surface. And then there's Mandy's Facebook post from months earlier, the one about choosing love over fear, about growing with someone instead of moving on. At the time she wrote it, it probably felt hopeful, like she was choosing to believe in something better. Reading it now, knowing what came after, it's almost unbearable. It's a reminder that people in complicated relationships often hold on to hope for good reasons. They're not naive, they're human, and hindsight has a cruel way of turning hopeful words into something that feels like foreshadowing, even though Mandy had absolutely no way of knowing what was coming. As of the most recent updates, the investigation into the exact details, the full timeline, what exactly happened during that drive to Spring Hill, remains active. Detectives were still working to piece together precisely when Savetz shot Mandy and what happened in those roughly 90 minutes between the moment she pulled into her driveway and the moment deputies found that car. Some questions in this case may never be fully answered, and it's important we sit with that honestly instead of filling in gaps with speculation. So where does that leave us? A mother is gone. 2 young girls are growing up without her, now in the care of their father, forced to carry memories of the worst day of their lives for the rest of their lives. A community in Hudson and Spring Hill is left trying to make sense of how someone entrusted with protecting the public could become the person responsible for so much pain. Friends of Mandy have spoken about her since this happened, and what comes through consistently is how much she was loved, not just as a mother, but as a friend, as someone who made people feel like they mattered. Sheriff Galtieri himself said it plainly. He said their hearts go out to her family and to those kids, and that as a community, people will show up to help however they can. But he was honest too. He said nobody can replace their mom. This case leaves us with some heavy questions worth sitting with. Why do we so often see warning signs in hindsight that were nearly invisible in the moment, even to people who loved someone deeply? How does someone maintain a public identity as a protector while privately being part of a relationship marked by that much volatility? And what does it say about how we vet and support people in positions of power and trust when someone with 14 years of service and a record of heroism can still be capable of something like this? I don't think there are easy answers here. I don't think this is a case where you walk away feeling like everything makes sense. Sometimes the most honest thing we can do with a story like this is admit that it doesn't fully add up, and that the people left behind, especially those 2 girls, deserve more than just answers. They deserve support, safety, and the chance to eventually find some peace. If this story affected you the way it affected me putting it together, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Tap the bell so you don't miss the next case, and drop a comment letting me know what stood out to you most. Was it the kids on that 911 call? The thumbs up from a stranger who had no idea what was happening? The fact that this all started over television? Let's talk about it below. This has been Crime Files, and I'll see you in the next one.